Hello, Year 8. I hope that you're all well. I hope that you've had a good weekend, and I hope you enjoyed Chapter 1 of Five Children and It. We're going to recap and then continue reading Chapter 2 from the story. I'm really enjoying this book. It's fast become my favourite read, so I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. So just to recap then, Chapter 1, the children had moved to the countryside from London, and they were very much enjoying the outdoor spaces and exploring. They met the Samiad or Sand Fairy, and they made a wish to become as beautiful as the day, and that was what Chapter 1 was called. And the children got their wish. They all became beautiful, but as a result of that, none of them recognised each other. And then the baby was upset and didn't recognise them. And then finally, when they tried to return home, they weren't able to because none of the staff from the house recognised them. So they had to wait outside until sunset, until the wish wore off. And I think at first they weren't sure if it would wear off or they'd stay that way forever. So it just goes to show that even if you get what you wish for, it's not always as wonderful as it might have seemed, and the grass isn't always greener. So I think they were happy in the end to return to their previous selves and to be able to return home. And we're going to carry on now with Chapter 2 of the story. So just bear with me while I share the page with the VLE reader. So you can read along with me. Hopefully that comes up. You can read along with me, or you can just listen. It's entirely up to you. So let's get started. So our chapter is called Golden Guineas. Anthea woke in the morning from a very real sort of dream, in which she was walking in the zoological gardens on a pouring wet day without any umbrella. The animals seemed desperately unhappy because of the rain, and were all growling gloomily. When she awoke, both the growling and the rain went on just the same. The growling was the heavy, regular breathing of her sister Jane, who had a slight cold and was still asleep. The rain fell in slow drops onto Anthea's face from the wet corner of a bath towel, which her brother Robert was gently squeezing the water out of to wake her up, as he now explained. "Oh, drop it," she said rather crossly. So he did, for he was not a brutal brother, though very ingenious, in apple pie beds, booby traps, original methods of awakening sleeping relatives, and the other little achievements which make home happy. "I had such a funny dream," Anthea began. "So did I," said Jane, wakening suddenly and without warning. "I dreamed we found a sand fairy in the gravel pits, and it said it was a Samiad, and we might have a new wish every day, and—" "But that's what I dreamed," said Robert. "I was just going to tell you. And we had the first wish directly. It said so. And I dreamed you girls were donkeys enough just to ask for us all to be beautiful as the day, and we jolly well were, and it was perfectly beastly." "But can different people all dream the same thing?" said Anthea, sitting up in bed. "Because I dreamed all that, as well as about the zoo and the rain. And baby didn't know us in my dream, and the servant shut us out of the house because the radiantness of our beauty was such a complete disguise. And—" The voice of the eldest brother sounded from across the landing. "Come on, Robert," it said. "You'll be late for breakfast again, unless you mean to shirk your bath like you did on Tuesday." "I say, come here a sec," Robert replied. "I didn't shirk it. I had it after breakfast in Father's dressing room because ours was emptied away." Cyril appeared in the doorway, partially clothed. "Look here," said Anthea. "We've all had such an odd dream. We've all dreamed we found a sand fairy." Her voice died away before Cyril's contemptuous glance. "Dream," he said. "You little sillies, it's true. I tell you it all happened. That's why I'm so keen on being down early. We'll go up there directly after breakfast and have another wish. Only we'll make up our minds solid before we go what it is we want. And no one must ask for anything unless the others agree first. No more peerless beauties for this child, thank you. Not if I know it." The other three dressed with their mouths open. If all that dream about the sand fairy was real, this real dressing seemed very like a dream, the girls thought. Jane felt that Cyril was right, but Anthea was not sure till after they had seen Martha and heard her full and plain reminders about their naughty conduct the day before. Then Anthea was sure, because she said servants never dream anything but the things in the dream book, like snakes and oysters and going to a wedding. That means a funeral. And snakes are a false female friend, and oysters are babies. Talking of babies, said Cyril, where's the lamb? Martha's going to take him to Rochester to see her cousins. Mother said she might. She's dressing him now, said Jane, in his very best coat and hat. Bread and butter, please. She seems to like talking to him too. She seems to like taking him too, said Robert in a tone of wonder. Servants do like taking babies to see their relations, Cyril said. I've noticed it before, especially in their best things. I expect they pretend they're their own babies and that they're not servants at all, but married to noble dukes of high degree. And they say the babies are the little dukes and duchesses, Jane suggested dreamily, taking more marmalade. I expect that's what Martha will say to her cousin. She'll enjoy herself most frightfully. She won't enjoy herself most frightfully carrying our infant duke to Rochester, said Robert. Not if she's anything like me, she won't. Fancy walking to Rochester with the lamb on your back. Oh, crikey, said Cyril, in full agreement. She's going by carrier, said Jane. Let's see them off. Then we shall have done a polite and kindly act, and we shall be quite sure we've got rid of them for the day. So they did. Martha wore her Sunday dress of 2 shades of purple, so tight in the chest that it made her stoop, and her blue hat with the pink cornflowers and white ribbon. She had a yellow lace collar with a green bow, and the lamb had indeed his very best cream-coloured silk coat and hat. It was a smart party that the carrier's cart picked up at the crossroads, when its white tilt and red wheels had slowly vanished in a swirl of chalk dust. And now for the Psammead, said Cyril, and off they went. As they went, they decided on the wish they would ask for. Although they were all in a great hurry, they did not try to climb down the sides of the gravel pit, but went round by the safe lower road, as if they had been carts. They had made a ring of stones round the place where the sand fairy had disappeared, so they easily found the spot. The sun was burning and bright, and the sky was deep blue, without a cloud. The sand was very hot to touch. Oh, suppose it was only a dream after all, Robert said, as the boys uncovered their spades from the sand heap, where they had buried them, and began to dig. Suppose you were a sensible chap, said Cyril. One's quite as likely as the other. Suppose you kept a civil tongue in your head, Robert snapped. Suppose we girls take a turn, said Jane, laughing. You boys seem to be getting very warm. Suppose you don't come shoving your silly oar in, said Robert, who was now warm indeed. We won't, said Anthea quickly. Robert, dear, don't be so grumpy. We won't say a word. You shall be the one to speak to the fairy and tell him what we've decided to wish for. You'll say it much better than we shall. Suppose you drop being a little humbug, said Robert, but not crossly. Look out, dig with your hands now. So they did, and presently uncovered the spider-shaped brown hairy body, long arms and legs, bat's ears and snail's eyes of the sand fairy himself. Everyone drew a deep breath of satisfaction, for now, of course, it couldn't have been a dream. The Psammead sat up and shook the sand out of its fur. How's your left whisker this morning? Said Anthea politely. Nothing to boast of, said it. It had rather a restless night, but thank you for asking. I say, said Robert, do you feel up to giving wishes today? Because we very much want an extra besides the regular one. The extra's a very little one, he added reassuringly. Said the sand fairy. If you read the story aloud, please pronounce exactly as I spelt it, for that is how he said it. Do you know, until I heard you being disagreeable to each other, just over my head, and so loud too, I really quite thought I had dreamed you all. I do have very odd dreams sometimes. Do you? Jane hurried to say, so as to get away from the subject of disagreeableness. I wish, she added politely, you'd tell us about your dreams. They must be awfully interesting. Is that the day's wish? Said the Sand Fairy, yawning. Cyril muttered something about just like a girl, and the rest stood silent. If they said yes, then goodbye to the other wishes they had decided to ask for. If they said no, it would be very rude, and they had all been taught manners, and had learned a little too, which is not all the same thing. Which is not at all the same thing. A sigh of relief broke from all lips when the Sand Fairy said, If I do, I shan't have strength to give you your second wish, not even good tempers or common sense or manners or little things like that. We don't want you to put yourself out at all about these things. We can manage them quite well ourselves, said Cyril eagerly, while the others looked guiltily at each other and wished the fairy would not keep all on about good tempers, but give them one good rowing if it wanted to, and then have done with it. Well, said the Psammead, putting out his long snail's eyes so suddenly that one of them nearly went into the round boy's eyes of Robert. Let's have the little wish first. We don't want the servants to notice the gifts you give us. Are kind enough to give us, said Anthea in a whisper. Are kind enough to give us, I mean, said Robert. The fairy swelled himself out a bit, let his breath go, and said, I've done that for you. It was quite easy. People don't notice things much anyway. What's the next wish? We want, said Robert slowly, to be rich beyond the dreams of something or other. Avarice, said Jane. So it is, said the fairy unexpectedly, but it won't do you much good. That's one comfort, it muttered to itself. Come, I can't go beyond dreams, you know. How much do you want, and will you have it in gold or notes? Gold, please, and millions of it. This gravel pit full be enough, said the fairy in an offhand manner. Oh, yes. Then get out before I begin, or you'll be buried alive in it. It made its skinny arms so long, and waved them so frighteningly, that the children ran as hard as they could towards the road by which the carts used to come to the gravel pits. Only Anthea had presence of mind enough to shout a timid, Good morning! I hope your whisker will be better tomorrow, as she ran. On the road they turned and looked back, and they had to shut their eyes and open them very slowly, a little bit at a time, because the sight was too dazzling for their eyes to be able to bear it. It was something like trying to look at the sun at high noon on Midsummer Day. For the whole of the sandpit was full right up to the very top, with new shining gold pieces, and all of the little sand martins' little front doors were covered out of sight. Where the road for the carts wound into the gravel pit, the gold lay in heaps like stones lie by the roadside, and a great bank of shining gold shelved down from where it lay flat and smooth between the tall sides of the gravel pit. And all the gleaming heap was minted gold, and on the sides and edges of these countless coins the midday sun shone and sparkled and glowed and gleamed till the quarry looked like the mouth of a smelting furnace, or one of the fairy halls that you see sometimes in the sky at sunset. The children stood with their mouths open, and no one said a word. At last Robert stopped and picked up one of the loose coins from the edge of the heap by the cart road and looked at it. He looked on both sides, then he said in a low voice quite different to his own, It's not sovereigns. It's gold anyway, said Cyril, and now they all began to talk at once. They all picked up the golden treasure by handfuls and let it run through their fingers like water. The chink it made as it fell was wonderful music. At first they quite forgot to think of spending the money. It was so nice just to play with. Jane sat down between two heaps of gold, and Robert began to bury her as you bury your father in sand when you are at the seaside and he has gone to sleep on the beach, with his newspaper over his face. But Jane was not half buried before she cried out, Oh, stop, it's too heavy, it hurts. Robert said, Bosh, and went on, Let me out, I tell you, cried Jane, and was taken out very white and trembling a little. You've no idea what it's like, she said. It's like stones on you, or like chains. Look here, Cyril said. If this is to do us any good, it's no good our staying gasping at it like this. Let's fill our pockets up and go and buy things. Don't you forget, it won't last after sunset. I wish we'd asked the Psammead why things don't turn to stone. Perhaps this will. I'll tell you what, there's a pony and cart in the village. Do you want to buy that? Asked Jane. No, silly, we'll hire it, and then we'll go to Rochester and buy heaps and heaps of things. Look here, let's each take as much as we can carry. But it's not sovereigns. They've got a man's head on one side, and a thing like the ace of spades on the other. Fill your pockets with it, I tell you, and come along. You can jaw as we go, if you must jaw. Cyril sat down and began to fill his pockets. You make fun of me for getting father to have 9 pockets in my Norfolks, said he, but now you see. They did, for when Cyril had filled his 9 pockets and his handkerchief and the space between himself and his shirt front with gold coins, he had to stand up. But he staggered and had to sit down again in a hurry. Throw out some of the cargo, said Robert. You'll sink the ship, old chap. That comes of 9 pockets. And Cyril had to. Then they set off to walk to the village. It was more than a mile, and the road was very dusty indeed, and the sun seemed to get hotter and hotter, and the gold in their pockets got heavier and heavier. It was Jane who said, I don't see how we're going to spend it all. There must be thousands of pounds among the lot of us. I'm going to leave some of mine behind this stump in the hedge, and directly we get to the village, we'll buy some biscuits. I know it's long past dinner time. She took out a handful or 2 of the gold and hid it in the hollows of an old hornbeam. How round and yellow they are, she said. Don't you wish they were gingerbread nuts and we were going to eat them? Well, they're not, and we're not, said Cyril. Come on. But they came on heavily and wearily. Before they reached the village, more than one stump in the hedge concealed its little hoard of hidden treasure. Yet they reached the village with about 1,200 guineas in their pockets. But in spite of this inside wealth, they looked quite ordinary outside, and no one would have thought that they could have more than half a crown each at the outside. The haze of heat, the blue of the wood smoke, made a sort of dim misty cloud over the red roofs of the village. The 4 sat down heavily on the first bench they came to. It happened to be outside the Blue Boar Inn. It was decided that Cyril should go into the Blue Boar and ask for ginger beer. Because, as Anthea said, it is not wrong for men to go into public houses, only for children. And Cyril is nearer to being a man than us because he is the eldest. So he went. The others sat in the sun and waited. Oh, hats, how hot it is, said Robert. Dogs put their tongues out when they're hot. I wonder if it would call us at all to put out ours. We might try, Jane said, and they all put their tongues out as far as ever they could go, so that it quite stretched their throats. But it only seemed to make them thirstier than ever, besides annoying everyone who went by. So they took their tongues in again, just as Cyril came back with the ginger beer. I had to pay for it out of my own 2 and 7pence, though, that I was going to buy rabbits with, he said. They wouldn't change the gold, and when I pulled out a handful, the man just laughed and said it was card counters, and I got some sponge cakes too, out of a glass jar on the bar counter, and some biscuits with caraways in. The sponge cakes were both soft and dry, and the biscuits were dry too, and yet soft, which biscuits ought not to be. But the ginger beer made up for everything. It's my turn now to try to buy something with the money. Anthea said, I'm next eldest. Where is the pony cart kept? It was at the Chequers, and Anthea went in the back way to the yard, because they all knew that little girls ought not to go into the bars of public houses, so she came out as she herself said, pleased but not proud. He'll be ready in a brace of shakes, he says, she remarked, and he's to have 1 sovereign, or whatever it is, to drive us to Rochester and back, besides waiting there till we've got everything we want. I think I'm managed very well." "You think yourself jolly clever, I dare say," said Cyril moodily. "How did you do it?" I wasn't jolly clever enough to go taking handfuls of money out of my pocket and make it seem cheap anyway," she retorted. "I just found a young man doing something to a horse's leg with a sponge and a pail, and I held out 1 sovereign and I said, 'Do you know what this is?' He said no, and he'd call his father. And the old man came, and he said it was a spade guinea, and he said it was my own to do with as I liked with, and I said yes. And I asked about the pony cart, and I said he could have the guinea if he'd drive us into Rochester, and his name is S. Crispin, and he said righto. It was a new sensation to be driven in a smart pony trap along pretty country roads. It was very pleasant too, which is not always the case with new sensations, quite apart from the beautiful plans of spending the money which each child made as they went along, silently of course and quite to itself, for they felt it would never have done to let the old innkeeper hear them talk in the affluent sort of way they were thinking. The old men put them down by the bridge at their request. "If you were going to buy a carriage and horses, where would you go?" asked Cyril, as if he were only asking for the sake of something to say. "Billy Peasmarsh at the Saracen's Head," said the old man promptly. "Though all forbid I should recommend any man where is a question of horses. Though all forbid I should recommend any man where it's a question of horses, no more than I'd take anybody else's recommending if I was a-buying one. But if your pa's thinking of a turnout of any sort, there ain't a straighter man in Rochester, nor a civiller spoken than Billy, though I says it." "Thank you," said Cyril, "the Saracen's Head." And now the children began to see one of the laws of nature turn upside down and stand on its head like an acrobat. Any grown-up persons would tell you that money is hard to get and easy to spend, but the fairy money had been easy to get, and spending it was not only hard, it was impossible. The tradespeople of Rochester seemed to shrink to a tradesperson from the glittering fairy gold. Furrin money, they called it, for the most part. To begin with, Anthea, who had the misfortune to sit on her hat earlier in the day, wished to buy another. She chose a very beautiful one, trimmed with pink roses and the blue breasts of peacocks. It was marked in the window, Paris model, 3 guineas. "I'm glad," she said, "because if it says guineas, it means guineas and not sovereigns, which we haven't got." But when she took 3 of the spade guineas in her hand, which was by this time rather dirty, owing to her not having put on gloves before going to the gravel pit, the black silk young lady in the shop looked very hard at her, and went and whispered something to an older and uglier lady, also in black silk, and then they gave her back the money and said it was not current coin. "It's good money," said Anthea, "and it's my own." "I dare say," said the lady, "but it's not the kind of money that's fashionable now, and we don't care about taking it." "I believe they think we've stolen it," said Anthea, rejoining the others in the street. "If we had gloves, they wouldn't think we were so dishonest. It's my hands being so dirty fills their minds with doubts." So they chose a humble shop, and the girls bought cotton gloves, the kind at 6 pence 3 farthings. But when they offered a guinea, the woman looked at it through her spectacles and said she had no change. So the gloves had to be paid for out of Cyril's 2 and 7 pence that he meant to buy rabbits with. And so had the green imitation crocodile skin purse at 9 pence halfpenny, which had been bought at the same time. They tried several more shops, the kinds where you buy toys and scent and silk handkerchiefs and books and fancy boxes of stationery and photographs of objects of interest in the vicinity. But nobody cared to change a guinea that day in Rochester, and as they went from shop to shop they got dirtier and dirtier, and their hair got more and more untidy, and Jane slipped and fell down on a part of the road where a water cart had just gone by. Also, they got very hungry, but they found no one would give them anything to eat for their guineas. After trying 2 pastry cooks in vain, they became so hungry, perhaps from the smell of cake in the shops, as Cyril suggested, that they formed a plan of campaign in whispers and carried it out in desperation. They marched into a third pastry cook's, Beale his name was, and before the people behind the counter could interfere, each child had seized 3 new penny buns, clapped the 3 together between its dirty hands, and taken a big bite out of the triple sandwich. Then they stood at bay with the 12 buns in their hands and their mouths very full indeed. The shocked pastry cook bounded round the corner. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm stopping on page 33. So, year 8, I would like you to carry on reading from page 34 onwards. And then I will set you a task to complete on Show My Homework, or your teacher as well, if your teachers aren't me. I hope that you enjoyed the story, and I hope you enjoy reading the rest on your own. And I hope you have a lovely rest of the day. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye.